Hello and welcome to the Gerrim Onside podcast, second episode. Hope you enjoyed last week. We've tweaked the format a little bit. We've changed to a different app because the video quality wasn't very good last week, and teething problems as you can say, I suppose. But welcome to this second episode on today, the 28th of July. I want to say, yeah, 28th of July.
Yeah.
Following three Super League games with myself, editor Nathan, and my usual co-host Ian Judson. Say hello, Ian.
Hello, Ian. Yeah, all right, mate.
Yeah, I'm not so bad. I've missed watching Rovers this weekend, but I suppose you've had your experience at Hull
No, I've
FC.
missed not watching Hull FC this week.
I'm pretty
Can
sure
I,
that
can
it's
I just put a shout out to Aidan Simpson, Castleford fan, who tuned in last week and said that it was really good, which I think he deserves a medal for putting up with all the disruption that we got on that platform.
yeah.
And yeah, and I just I hope his team wins next weekend.
Well, they managed to beat Warrington, so stranger things have happened. Um,
Who knows?
yeah, I'm pretty sure that Hull's downfall came down to the fact that I predicted them to win again, because that seems to happen every time that I predict a Hull
Yeah,
win.
yeah. Please don't predict that
In our
we'll beat
predictions.
Salford in 2 weeks' time. Deary me.
All right, speaking of the results, let's kick off with the usual roundup. So we've got in the men's Super League, Wakefield Trinity 15, Leeds Rhinos 14. Hell of a game that on Thursday night. Wigan Warriors 28, Catalans Dragons 18. And of course, the big news of the weekend, Hull FC 14, Huddersfield Giants 30. Hull FC not winning back-to-back games in 2 years. Home games, that is. In the NRL,
So we did win back-to-back games before that.
in the NRL, Sydney Roosters 30, Melbourne Storm 34, North Queensland Cowboys 38, St George Illawarra 32, Brisbane Broncos 20, Parramatta Eels 22, New Zealand Warriors 16, Gold Coast 24, Penrith 32, West Tigers 2, Penrith well on the way to turning their season around there. South Sydney Rabbitohs 12, Cronulla Sharks 14. That puts the Bunnies at the foot of the NRL table. Canberra Raiders 44, Newcastle Knights 18, and Canterbury Bulldogs 42, Manly Sea Eagles 4. Over in the Women's Super League, Warrington Wolves 0, St Helens 26, Barrow Raiders 16, Lee Leopards 10, Wigan Warriors 30, Leeds Rhinos 16, and the York Valkyrie 26, Huddersfield Giants 6. In the men's championship, Halifax Panthers 12, York Knights 18. The Knights extending their stay at the top of the championship there. Barrow Raiders 14, Toulouse 34. Doncaster 42, Batley 16. Featherstone 36, London Broncos 18. Oldham 48, Hunslet 16. Widnes Vikings 16, Bradford Bulls 28. And finally, down in League One, we have Swinton. That should be, it says Swindon on the website. I'll correct that a little later. Swinton Lions 16, Midlands Hurricanes 8. Gull Vikings 0, Rochdale 50, bringing a good run for the Vikings to an end there. Keighley Cougars 26, Whitehaven 14, and Newcastle Thunder 6, North Wales Crusaders 72. So, what was your game of the weekend then, Ian?
I mean, it has to be Thursday night, doesn't it? Wakey against Leeds. I think it had everything. To be fair, I think the second best team won. Obviously, you'd say that they deserved to win for how they played, but I think we have to give mention to the Leeds defence because they were under so much intense pressure. And Wakey are a very free-scoring team, aren't they? And normally in a situation like that, you would have expected them to put Leeds to bed a long time before they did. But Leeds' heroic defence and they had enough about them to come back and take the lead, didn't they, towards the end with the Jared O'Connor try. But they were just unfortunate that Brodie Croft's drop goal radar was just off target, wasn't it? I mean, it couldn't have been much closer, really, could it?
No.
And then Mason Lino does what Mason Lino does, and it's a clutch moment, and you've got to say he nailed it. And
He did.
you know, so in that sense, Wakefield deserved to win. But as I say, I thought they were very clearly second best on the night, and I think, you know, that they took care of business in that clutch moment. You know, and the Matty Staunton try came at a time when, you know, you were wondering where it was coming from, weren't you? You know, and, you know, it was a wonderful pass to him that put him through. And I mean, you as a Rovers fan, you would have seen him do that, make that sort of a run many a time, you know. So, you know, credit to Wakey. And, you know, and that puts them back in the playoff places, doesn't it? So, you know, I think that's got to go down as the game of the weekend, certainly.
It does, and also a big shout out to Wakefield's Caius Fertilli as well for his shaved his mullet off this past week for the wonderful charity Candle Lighters during an event at Wakefield Trinity. They're a very community-minded club over in Wakey.
They are, yeah, and I love to see that. You know, anything like any club, anything like that, I think is great. And you know, Wakey, they deserve a lot of credit for what they're doing off the pitch. Yeah, they're getting some plaudits on it, which, you know, yeah, they deserve them as they are at the moment. But you know, what they're doing off the pitch is fantastic as well, and it's great to see. Except that I have a problem with their Wi-Fi at their ground, because when I went and reported there on another Hull FC victory earlier this year, I couldn't actually get on the Wi-Fi. So that was there's something for them to be looking at. I couldn't get on the Wi-Fi. Some journos could, some couldn't. So that's maybe something they need to look at in future.
I played at the Wakefield ground at one of my PDRL festivals last month, and it's coming along in leaps and bounds from what it used to be there. But
let's be honest, that wouldn't be too difficult, would it?
No, it wouldn't.
And I'm sure they'd admit it as well, wouldn't they? But
yeah, probably. They're doing great things under the stewardship of Matt Ellis, who should be applauded for his investment in the club and in the community.
Yes, definitely. You know, and I think them and Lee and Rovers and Hull FC is starting to catch up. I think they're leading lights in what clubs are doing in their communities now, and I think it's a really good look. You know, so long may it continue, and well done, Wakefield Trinity, certainly.
Yeah, speaking of Wakefield, we had some breaking news before we started recording our podcast. The Wakefield Trinity head coach Darryl Powell's been hit with a £2,000 fine, with half of it suspended until the end of the 2026 season for comments he made after the Hull FC game, which you'll be very familiar with, Ian, because you were there. He joins Danny Maguire and Steve McNamara, who are now without clubs. They were fined last week for similar breaches of the RFL rules concerning comments made about referees. What's your take on these fines, Ian, without trying to be too harsh and losing your journalist accreditation?
I mean, yeah, I can understand why they've said what they've said. I mean, to be fair, Darryl Powell, it was maybe a bit more. It was maybe a bit more raw, because at the time they'd just been beaten, and he came out and he said it on TV, and then he, you know, and what I noticed in the media suite that night at the MKM Stadium, when we heard him say it on the TV when he was still pitch side and we were in the media suite, the atmosphere became a little bit more tense when he said that. When he then came into the media suite and said it again in front of the massed media, and there was quite a few of us in there, as you can imagine, when Sky TV are in town, the atmosphere changed even more. and it was, and I thought, wow, I thought, yeah, but at the end of the day, they're saying that it brings the game into disrepute. Does it really? Certainly, what Danny Maguire said after that defeat to Wigan, I felt he was entirely justified to say what he did. And as for Steve McNamara, what he said to Sky TV, I mean, he's basically poked the bear there, hasn't he? And he's fed Sky TV, he's fed us as journalists what we want. We want talk like that, and why they should be punished for it. I mean, at the end of the day, Steve McNamara is now outside of the game, and so is Danny Maguire. They're not part of the game now at the moment. Hopefully they both get jobs moving forward, but at the moment it seems a bit like kicking a man while he's down. They've both come out, they've given their opinion, and and then they've been kicked later on. And the same with Darryl Powell, although I disagreed with what Darryl Powell said at the time. But, that's, there's going to be people who will disagree with it. There's going to be people who will agree with what he said. I don't know. But I just think, we live in what is supposed to be a free society, and we're supposed to be a free press, and we don't want people dictating to our, the people that we have to interview. We don't want them being dictated to what they can and can't say, So having said that, I can understand how, you could easily also lose control if you do just let them say everything that they want to say. So it's a difficult one, because I feel for the coaches, because I've interviewed them all. I've interviewed them a few times, and they're all decent blokes. They're not out to create bother. They're there to to point out, well, look, I don't think that's quite right, and maybe the RFL need to look at these things, rather than just investigating them and fining them. They maybe need to think, well, why are these things being said? But at the end of the day, they've been judged to have done wrong, and that's up to the powers that be. It's not for me to say whether they've got it right or wrong. That's their job, and that's what they're there for. So that's what they've done.
Yeah, I feel like it's especially harsh on Danny Maguire, because he was fined the bigger amount, because he was fined 3,000 instead of 2,000, obviously with half suspended. And it turned out that his grievance was entirely correct, and the RFL agreed with him that the wrong decision had been made. And not only that, but the video referee concern was dropped the following week. And yet still...
And the thing was that they got a letter from Wigan Warriors saying, the player wasn't injured, it was fine, he didn't have any problem with it, blah, blah, blah. Why? It just seems to be a bit of, they wanted an axe to grind against him, and that's and it's given them that. However, I think certain things they need to take notice of, and they maybe just haven't there, and I don't know why. But like I say, that's up to them. That's what they're there for. So they've deemed it necessary, and but I mean, they will also say, oh well, we have taken it on board, and that's why we've suspended half of it, and that's why he's not having to pay the full amount, But at the end of the day, they've suspended it when he's not even in a job in the game at the moment anyway. So what do they expect to happen? I don't know.
Yeah, it's a difficult one, because, as you say, there has to be some sort of overseeing rules and guidance from the RFL. They can't just let people say what they want, especially about referees and things like that.
Well, yeah, I mean, without referees, you've got to give referees some protection. Yes.
Yeah.
Having said that, I would also say that they need to be subject to the same rules that everybody else are. You know, what if a referee comes out and says, "Oh, well, they've said this about me, and that's not right," and blah blah blah? What happens then? I don't know. You know, is it just immediately brushed under the carpet because it's a referee? You know, and we need referees to keep the game alive. I don't know.
It's the referees tend to be a talking point more than what I'm comfortable with, to be honest, because I think a referee's job is to be in the background and
We
facilitate the
are in
game
complete agreement.
as opposed to being the talking point.
I mean, what we always say, walking away from a ground, you know, and we've said it ever since I've been going to watch games since I was 4 years old, and I'm now 51. And we've always said it. You know, when a referee's had a good game is when you're not talking about him. Simple as that. So, yeah, there you go.
So, moving on to our next topic. Last week, we brought up the Ashes and we set ourselves a challenge of selecting who would be in our Ashes squad. So, I've got mine and Ian's got his. I'm going to let Ian have the first 10 at naming his team and see where we agree and see where we disagree, which should be quite interesting. So, if you'd like to start from the top, Ian.
Yeah, I mean, you sent me a message and you said, should we make it about what we think will be picked or what we would like to be picked? And I said, well, I think we should do it based on who is in form at the moment, you know, etc., etc. So the team I came up with is as follows. At fullback, I'd have Jack Broadbent because I think he's been there. He's been Challenge Cup final winning fullback. And, you know, for his utility value, it could be absolutely priceless. The three quarters, I would have Lewis Martin because he scores tries for fun, and we know from Andy Last this week that he has been mentioned at the top table at the England meetings, you know, with a possible shout for an Ashes spot. Herbie Farnworth, because obviously with his NRL experience, you know, England like their NRL players, don't they? And obviously he's a star of the game, isn't he? Then it would be Jake Wardle, because I think he's been the one consistent for Wigan while they're missing Bevan French and, you know, they were missing Jai Field the other night because of concussion, etc. He's been massively consistent, and everybody expects him to be in the squad anyway. And I think he's one who definitely deserves to be in it. And then Dom Young, obviously, again, England NRL player, and you know he's been there and done it for England. So I think he's an obvious one. Then my halfbacks that I would have would be a certain Mr. Mikey Lewis. Because I think him, you know, he's a try scorer, he's a sort of goal kicker, and he's a creator. And, you know, and I think he would bring something different, you know, that would unnerve Australia in certain aspects, definitely. And next to him, I've put a certain Mr. Jake Connor, because at the end of the day, he is leading the Man of Steel rankings, or he was when it went secret. And I think he has been by far and away the best halfback in Super League up to this point. And I think so based on current form, you have to have Jake Connor in there, no matter what you think about his temperament. The fact is, he brings something different. And he's, you know, he would be like Mikey Lewis. He would unnerve Australia in certain ways. The pack, the front row, I've got Mike McMeekan, Brad O'Neill, and Alex Walmsley. Now, Mike McMeekan and Alex Walmsley, they're both knocking on in years, aren't they? But they have also been absolutely massively consistent. You know, they go forward, they give everything to their team, don't they? And, you know, they put them on the front foot. And if England are going to have any chance against Australia, they need forwards who are going to put them on the front foot and are going to leave the sort of platform for the likes of a Mikey Lewis and a Jake Connor to take advantage of. And Brad O'Neill, just because at the moment Danny Walker is out injured for Warrington. I don't know how long before he comes back. He's going to obviously naturally come into the reckoning. But at the moment, I would say Brad O'Neill, because again, he's being consistent and he's doing the job that's being asked of him. And I think, that puts him in the forefront there. And then the back row, I've got Ben Curry, because I think at Warrington, every time I've seen him, he's making meters and he's working hard, and he's playing either back row or he's in the middle. He's playing at 13, and wherever you put him, he's doing a really good job for Warrington. They're having an up and down seat sort of a season, but he's been a consistent for me, and I think he deserves a shout, certainly. And then the other back row, I've got James Batchelor. I just think, because of the fact that he can also go and play at centre, can't he? He maybe looks a little bit lost at centre at times, but he
not been beaten as a centre, of course.
Sorry?
He's undefeated as a centre. We've never lost with James Batchelor playing centre.
But he maybe not his best position, but he's so I'll put him in the back row because I think he deserves to be there. He's been very consistent again. And then an obvious one at loose forward is Victor Radley, Victor the Inflictor, because I mean the thing about the NRL players is they all know the blokes that they're going to be playing against, and they're going to know what to expect from them. And I think that sort of insider knowledge, and as much of it as you can get, really helps. And Victor, he plays in the middle, doesn't he? And he's very good at it. And, so he has a real good view of what the other players that he's going to be up against around him are like. So I think he's that. I give him the number 13 shirt. Then the on the bench, because we said we'd go for 1 to 17, didn't we? Starting on the bench, I'd have Max Jowett, because, people would say put him at fullback instead of Jack Broadbent because he's a specialist fullback. Yes, he is, but he's also a very good halfback. He has got that, so Jack Broadbent and Max Jowett, between them, they've got all those backline positions covered. So, you could start with Jack Broadbent on the bench and Max Jowett at fullback, but, I'll just pull them that way, frankly. But they could go either way. The next one I've got on the bench is James Harrison from Warrington, because I think he's playing in a struggling team, isn't he? And he's a standout, and always know he's there or thereabouts. And I think I would give him the position just because, you could see how much it would mean to him. And I think he gives a lot of go forward, and he's a very, I think he's quite an underrated prop forward, to be fair. I think he's quite underrated, and I think he needs to be there or thereabouts. Next on the bench, I've got Morgan Smithies. Again, it's that NRL influence again, but of course he's been there. He knows what he's doing. And, again, like I said, that inside NRL experience, knowing what he'd be coming up against, I think would really help. And then finally, my last man on the bench I would be Matty Lees from St Helens, because I think every time I was shocked when he got in the dream team ahead of Herman Sasa last season, and I think most people were, and I think they were right to be shocked. This season, I think Matty Lees has come out and he said, right, well, I was a dream team member, and a lot of people are saying that I shouldn't have been. Well, I'm going to prove to them why I should be, and I think that's what he's doing. I think he's consistent, he's strong, and he's aggressive, and he has that sort of know-how. So that's why I'm putting him on the bench for England against Australia at Wembley Stadium.
I think what I realised putting together my team was you don't you don't really realise how difficult it is to assemble a team like this until you sit down and try and pick your 1 to 13, because no matter who you pick, there's always someone who you think afterwards, oh, what about this person? What about that
Oh
person?
yeah,
But
yeah.
there's no
I
way
mean,
of fitting every square peg in every
I
wrap
mean,
round.
you know, there are other names that I could have chucked in there. Obvious ones would be George Williams and Harry Smith, but I don't.
Yeah.
You know, George Williams, he's been getting better,
Mm,
but I don't think he's Mikey Lewis level yet.
no.
Um, another one that I would chuck in would be Davy Litton, because I think
Mm,
he's been very good. You know, he's adapting to a new position at centre, and you know, but I know from Andy Last in his press conference last week, he has also been spoken about for England, and so has Harvey Barron. You know, and
mm,
they're there on merit. They're there because of the form that they've been showing.
yeah.
And there will be others, you know, that I'm not aware of. But you know, so Davy Litton would be another one that I would chuck into the conversation. You know, if we'd have been picking a full 24-man squad that it will be, you
Hmm.
know, I would probably have George Williams in there, and I would probably have Davy Litton in there as well. I would think,
Yeah.
and
So,
I would dare say, as well, I would have Joe Burgess in there.
mm, surprisingly enough, we have a lot of similarities in our squad, but neither of us have picked George Williams and Harry Smith, because I don't think based on form and merit that either of them deserve to be there. I haven't gone with quite the same halfback pairing you have, but I'll go through my team now. For fullback, I've gone with Max Jowett. Now, I agree with what you're saying with Jack Broadbent, but I think with Broadbent, he's a utility man, and that works against you getting selected in squads like this because Max Jowett is specialist at a fullback, whereas Jack Broadbent is great at playing multiple different positions, but it doesn't have one fixed place. I think it makes me feel harsh, especially as a Rovers fan, to not select him. But I've gone with Max Jowett as my fullback. On the wing, my wing, I've got Liam Marshall on one wing, and I've got Joe Burgess on the other wing. And I've not selected Dom Young, which I realise is probably quite controversial, but I don't think he's having a very good season. He's been dropped down to second string a couple of times in Australia. He's moved about. He's struggling for form, and I think there are players
Yeah,
in the
but I mean,
Super
in the
League.
NRL, being dropped down to second string to and New South Wales or Queensland Cup is like dropping down to Super League level here. You
Yeah, but I
know,
just I just think there are wingers that are performing better in Super League than Dom Young is. So I've gone with Burgess, and I could quite easily have gone with Lewis Martin as well, who I chucked in as an honourable mention because I had a list of players I wanted to fit in but couldn't find anywhere for. So he was one I gave consideration to. My two centres are Jake Wardle, and I'd have him on Liam Marshall's wing because obviously they played together at Wigan, and that'd be a good combination. And Herbie Farnworth, of course, is the first name on my team sheet because he's probably the best in the world in his position right now, and there's no way that he doesn't play if he's fit. My halfback combination, I've gone for Mikey Lewis and Mark Sneed. Mark Sneed is my selection for scrum half. I think he's been underutilized at international level as Mark Sneed. He's having he's having a good season. He's having a good season in two different struggling sides at different points of the season. Won the Lance Todd Trophy again, quite deservedly in the Challenge Cup final. And I think it's either it's now or never for Mark Sneed. He gets the opportunity this year to show what he can do at an international level, or it's too late for him at the age that
yeah,
he's at.
I get that. Yeah,
Uh, so my first prop forward, I've gone for Mike McMeekan, Wakefield, mirroring what you say. He's having a great season. He's leading from the front at Wakey. You've not seen him play much for England. Um, I think he brings a good dynamic, and he's a leader as well. So in my team in particular, I haven't got George Williams, and he's the captain. So I think I would probably, if I was to pick a captain, which I haven't done a conscious decision to, I would pick McMeekan, I think. My other prop forward is Mikolaj Ledski from Leeds Rhinos. I think he's having a great season. Um, I think
okay.
he'd bring a fresh energy to the front row. Again, you could pick a number of different players there. Matty Lees, Luke Thompson, Alex Walmsley. I've got Walmsley on my bench, I think. But I think you need to be bringing through the players and giving them experience now on the big stage that they're going to need for the World Cup next year. And I think Mikolaj Oledzki is going to be one of your top choice prop forwards.
I mean that's the thing. You're looking at the Ashes and then looking at the World Cup immediately after it, aren't you? So yeah, I can understand that certainly.
My hooker, I've gone for Jez Litton. My hooker is interchangeable with the hooker that I've got on the bench. I've got Brad O'Neill as my hooker on the bench. I can accept an argument either way for either one of those two players. I
mean, the only reason I haven't put Jez Litton in is because he's had that bit of a controversy at Lee, hasn't he? He's had that injury and ban, etc. And so just at the moment, I'm not sure. Has he come back yet?
Yes, he'll be back this week for the Salford game.
Right. That's why I've not picked him, because he's just not been playing for a few weeks, basically.
Yeah. His second rows, I've gone for Kai Pearce-Paul. Again, NRL experience. Just got another big money deal at Wests for the next 3 years. And Morgan Knowles from St Helens. Again, he's going to the NRL, so that there's quality there. And my loose forward, Victor Radley, I think is an obvious choice, like you said. So there's a couple of differences in the second rows there. Morgan Knowles, if Victor Radley's a question mark as well because of the concussion issues that he's been having. So if you were to struggle with that again, I think I would switch Morgan Knowles to be my loose forward and plug someone else in my second row. So my bench, I've got
Batchelor,
like James Batchelor, exactly. I've got Brad O'Neill on my bench, as I said, entirely interchangeable with Jez Litton. Either of those could start. Junior and Semba, I've got on the bench. He's the one I ummed and ahed about the most because I think he's struggling to live up to the name that he built for himself last season, but he's still got that quality to offer. And
it might have, yes, but I'm just, I've left him out just because I've based it on current form at the moment. And last week, I suppose I should be bigging up Brad Fash for the job that he did on Junior and Semba last week. However, it was minimal, absolutely bare minimal impact from Semba. And, Sean Wayne said, oh, well, you've got to do it consistently. Well, Junior and Semba wasn't doing it consistently. Hasn't been for the last few weeks.
Yeah, I've got Luke Thompson on my bench as well. Again, offers big game experience, good to bring off the bench. And Elliot Minchella is my last one because I think he offers you cover, loose forward, your second rows, your prop forwards, and you need players like.
I mean, I haven't got Luke Thompson because he's out injured at the moment. So he's not played. He didn't play against Catalan, did he? He didn't play against us. So I just, he will be there, I'm sure. But I literally based this team on absolute current form.
Yeah, I did it as who I would like to see, mixed with a little bit of common sense dashed in there as to who would definitely be there.
I've based it to an extent on who I'm looking at because obviously I'm a member of the Rugby League Writers and Broadcasters Association, and then before too long, I'm going to be voting for the Rugby League Writers Player of the Year. So I've been looking at the players that I am looking at for that. Basically.
Yeah. Some other names that I've written down that I didn't find places for was obviously Jake Connor. That's the biggest headache for me. It's figuring out my halfback pairing. Where does Jake Connor fit in? Do you maybe play him at fullback? He can play there, but I don't think he's a specialist.
He's played at centre as well, hasn't he? And
it's
when he played at centre for their Test series against New Zealand, he was their worst nightmare, wasn't he? And he was loading the gun for Tommy Makinson to pull the trigger on a regular basis, wasn't he, in that series? So you'd maybe look at him at centre, but then again, he'd be going up against Jake Wardle and Herbie Farnworth. So
Yeah, and I think he
you
would have
maybe
to
put him on the bench for his utility value.
he'd have to feel really, really. Even though I don't particularly like him as a player, I'd feel very bad for him if he didn't make at least the extended squad because he deserves it on current form at least.
Yeah.
A couple of the other names I've got Will Price because but that all depends on an injury because I think he was finding his stride at Hull.
Yeah, he's coming back next week against Salford, him and John Asiata.
Yeah,
So Will Price, I would certainly be, he'll be there or thereabouts because, of course, he's got that NRL experience as well, hasn't he? So,
yeah,
I would say if we look at this in, say, 5 or 6 weeks' time,
yeah.
then maybe Will Price is our thoughts, and in
Yeah,
England's thoughts by then. I don't know. It just depends. See how he shapes up, coming
and
back from
they,
a long-term injury.
and again, much like Jake Connor, he has utility value because he can play at full back, he can play in the halves. I think he played on the wing at some point for Hull, didn't he? For one game.
Well, yeah, he was maybe forced onto the wing from full-back. I'm not sure.
And then I've got
Can I just chuck in a name as somebody who I would certainly stick in the squad for utility value, which I think he's proved beyond any shadow of a doubt this season so far. I would have Zach Hardaker in the squad for the way he's been playing it. I'm not saying he'd be a starter or even playing,
no.
but for his utility value and for his know-how and what he's bringing, and what he's doing with the young lads at Hull, etc., and the fact that he's got that experience. He was briefly in the NRL, wasn't he? I think he's got to be worth a shout for, certainly the extended squad.
It's a good shout.
Because
Yeah.
I think, the way he's been playing, I absolutely I was horrified when Hull signed him. And I'll put my hands up in the air and say I was completely wrong about him because what you see from him, what I see from him down at the training ground, he has got this infectious enthusiasm, and obviously he's got this sheer desire to win. And I think when you play in Australia, that will to win can make a big difference. So I would certainly put in a shout for Zach Hardaker to be in the England squad. And then, I can go and tell him that when I see him at the training ground and see what he says.
I'm sure that he'll be happy about that. I've got some backup forwards here that I wanted to mention as well. Alex Walmsley, Owen Trout, Callum Watkins. I think he's having a really good season back at Leeds. James Batchelor, who you mentioned.
Robbie Mulhern.
A sentimental shout maybe for Dean Hadley, who I think is a fantastic player who's well due an international cap. And John Bateman as well, who's probably going to be there or thereabouts.
You would think so, wouldn't you? I'm not convinced, but you would think he'll be somewhere in the offing, wouldn't you?
Yeah, they tend to favour the players that are in the NRL, don't they? Even if they're not playing. And again, there's the players like Dom Young, and Lewis Martin, especially, who's having a fantastic season. I must admit that he's a fantastic player.
I mean, Lewis Martin, people keep saying to me, he has to keep doing it, he has to do it for more than one season. Well, I'm sorry, but he played in a struggling side last season and he was our top try scorer then. So he is carrying it on. He's not a one season wonder.
The reason I plumped for Joe Burgess over Lewis Martin in my team, it wasn't particularly to do with the fact that he plays for Rovers. It's the fact that Joe Burgess has been there and done it. He's got the big game experience that Lewis Martin perhaps lacks. And I think in a few years there won't be much question about picking Lewis Martin.
The reason I picked Lewis Martin over Joe Burgess, it's not for the obvious reasons. It's the fact that I think he is Joe Burgess. He's approaching the twilight of his career, and I think if you're looking at an Ashes series then leading into a World Cup, then you're looking at somebody more Lewis Martin's age than Joe Burgess's age. If that makes sense. But there you go.
I think both sides of the argument have merits, and I think both will have their subscribers and
Maybe
their
they'll both get an
detractors.
England shirt. Who knows?
Maybe. I mean,
when Joe Burgess, he was at Wigan with Sean Wayne, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was, and I also thought of Ollie Gildart at Rovers. He was having a fantastic season before injury derailed him.
I think with Oliver Gildart, because I mean he's been what is it, a 4-month injury, isn't it?
Yeah,
that's a lot
too long of a layoff. It is,
and be ready to play Australia.
Yeah,
I think Will Price. We were told 8 to 10 weeks, and I think it's been about 8 weeks. And I think even then, that's borderline for him to get him back to full match fitness before the end of the season. Hull might be in the playoffs, so they might have 1 or 2 extra games in that. They might not. We're not sure yet. But he's got a few games to hopefully get back up to match fitness. And then that's when you start to think, could he? But, and that's just an example. I'm not saying him in particular. That's just an example. But
yeah, I think what Will Price has over Oliver Gildart in that respect, as well as Will Price has got age on his side. I think he might have the ability to bounce back a bit more than Gildart would.
Yeah, he's only 23, isn't he?
Yeah, exactly.
And I think, to be fair, the fact that he's been to the NRL, it's put an older head on his younger shoulders as that. And I think, so that could make a difference. But having said that, he has to come back and he has to be doing what he did against Catalan. He has to be doing that most weeks, I think.
Yeah.
To really be in with a shout.
So I've got one more topic of discussion. You bring up Catalan, it brings me nicely to our final topic of discussion. The discourse over French teams in the Super League has been back in the news cycle, with Nigel Wood claiming that Lee brought
shock horror.
that Lee brought 4 million euros into the Perpignan economy, which is a ridiculous claim to begin with, because most travelling fans don't even stay in Perpignan, so that claim is utterly baseless.
In Spain, don't they?
Yeah, but I want to know, what's your opinion on having Catalans and French teams in particular in the Super League?
I can understand why people enjoy it, and they make a holiday out of it, etc., or a good weekend away, maybe a stag weekend or a hen weekend or whatever, or a birthday trip away or something like that. My problem with it is Catalan Dragons and, to a lesser extent, Toulouse Olympique were brought into Super League because they were meant to nurture a better, more competitive French national team, and it just hasn't worked. What was it? Was it last year or a year before? An England fringe team went to France, to Toulouse, and absolutely wiped the floor with the French first choice team. Imagine what an England with all its NRL players in it would do to them. You'd be talking cricket scores, wouldn't you? For it to work, and I can see why the Australians would say, "Oh, we're going to have 2 French teams in it," because then that maybe extends the player pool, etc., for them. And I can see that. However, I think Catalan, as much as they've brought to Super League, I I think it's something that just hasn't really worked. Yeah, they've brought in some big name signings, etc. Some people say that they bought the Challenge Cup in 2018, because of the players that they went out and signed rather than developing their own, and they have developed their own to an extent, certainly. And good on them for that. And, I'm held back a bit because I've never been to Catalan. I've never. Unfortunately, I don't have the budget to travel there at the drop of a hat. Unfortunately, so yeah, I would want to go and experience it for myself first before I really pass judgment. But if I'm passing judgment on what I know at the moment, it's like I say, it's not worked because like I said, they were meant to nurture young French players into an international team that could compete with the likes of England, New Zealand, Australia. And they've been here nearly 20 years now, and they're no nearer to it now than they were back then, are they? Let's be honest.
No.
But, people will have their own opinions. I know a very good mate of mine, Steph Sale, who's a Lee supporter. He loves his trips down to Perpignan to go and watch the Leopards there, etc. So a lot of people will say, yeah, it's great. It's a great trip down there, blah, 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 and all the rest of it. And I'm sure it is. And it's a great experience. However, have they served their purpose? No, definitely not. And what you're also getting now, fans are saying, oh, well, we're having to pay to go to Las Vegas. We're paying to go to Perpignan. We're paying to go to Wembley. We're paying to go to Old Trafford, blah, 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 wherever else. Rovers went to Amsterdam, didn't they? If you chuck that into the mix as well, just at what point do you start to think, well, hang on a minute, this trip to France, we're doing it every year, because some people are. At what point do people start getting bored of doing it every year? I don't know. But, like I said, I would want to experience that trip to, go to Lorette and, and jump across the border. Unfortunately, it'd be a bit more difficult for me because then I'd be asking a fans coach to hang about for me to go and do press conferences after a game, and I'm not sure that they actually would. So for me, I would have to experience it by funding it myself, flying over there, staying somewhere in Perpignan so that I can walk back to, if you like, after doing press conferences, etc. Because to ask a fans coach to hang about for me for an hour afterwards just wouldn't be fair,
No.
So, but I would still love to go and do press there, and I would love to go and do press at Toulouse if I got the chance, if they come back up. However, based on what I know so far, I would say probably Super League would be better off without them. But I'm open to having my mind changed about that.
Yeah, I think I'd preface my opinion by saying that I've never been to Catalans either, but I think their presence in the league makes it a better proposition for sponsors, makes it a better proposition for broadcasters, because it makes your competition seem like it's got a wider appeal if it's a European competition.
But I mean, how fair is it on Bernard Gouache and whoever else, that they have to fund clubs getting over there?
Well,
so at what point does that become untenable?
It's not, but Monsieur Gouache must be happy to do it because I haven't heard him make any complaints about it.
But having said that, I'm sure things are said behind the scenes.
Yeah, and the argument about the French national team, while I can understand it, I think it takes significantly longer than 20 years to rebuild a a national team from the ground up, because it's not.
Yeah, I mean, at 20 years, you would expect them now. You certainly wouldn't have expected them to be getting absolutely walloped by an England fringe team, would you? Really?
No, but
you'd expect them to be competing.
I'm also thinking of the context of within the wider area of the fact that rugby league in France has a very complex history. To say the least, it was banned in Vichy France in the 1940s and 50s. It had to be rebuilt completely from scratch in the 1950s.
I completely get that.
And that there are still echoes of that now. The French team now are a lot better than what they were 20 years ago. To me, it's what's going to be like in another 20 years that's important.
But I mean, the Catalan have advertised it in recent weeks. They've signed 2 more overseas players from the NRL. That's not about developing young French players. That's not doing anything for the French national team. It's all about Catalan, and I get why it has to be about Catalan, but Catalan are also meant to be, if you like, a loss leader for the French national team, and I would dare say you'd put Toulouse in that bracket as well. And whether they actually do that is quite another matter. What I would suggest that possibly would maybe help with the development of a French national team, a competitive one. This is something that I thought of, and I don't know how they would fit it in or where they would fit it in or whatever. But I thought something like a 5 Nations championship. I know Rugby Union had 5 nations, now it has 6 nations. I would say a 5 Nations championship now of Wales, Ireland, Scotland, France, and the England Knights would maybe be something to help, to build up Great Britain again. Rather than it just being England, it'd be a Great Britain team again, like it was before, and build up the French national team, and build up Scotland, Wales, and Ireland as well for a World Cup, and just something to help with that development phase. And if they could do something like that, because obviously then with the England Knights, rather than England, trouncing everybody, you've got the England young lads instead going into an international camp, taking part in an international competition. I think that might be something more useful for a French national team and for a Great Britain team, etc. Rather than having French club sides who are serving their own purpose in Super League. But like I said, I'm open to having my mind changed about about the experience of going down to Catalan. I'll do it at some point. I've no doubt I will at some point. But at the moment, I'm basing it on what I know so far.
It's definitely on my to-do list, and there are arguments for and against it that are compelling.
Yeah.
I don't know. I can take him on an aeroplane, and it wouldn't be too. I'm not sure whether the weather conditions might be a bit too much for him, because it often gets too hot here during the summer. So what it would be like taking him to Lorette de Mar for 5 days.
Yeah, but what if you go and play them in February?
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. So
somebody has to go and play them in February in the south of France, don't they?
Yeah, and
we had to go back again, didn't we? But hey, there we go.
Another thing worth pointing out about Catalans is they have built up a decent home following, more so than some of the Heartland clubs have got. They're regularly drawing bigger crowds than Salford and Huddersfield.
And Huddersfield.
Yeah.
compared to Catalan's crowds, well, there is no comparison, is there?
No, and they're a passionate crowd as well. They're
yeah. And I think the thing is, I mean, when we say about we love a trip to Las Vegas because the fans are so passionate there, and they get similar crowds to what Catalan get. You know what I mean? So yeah, I get that. But first and foremost, I think if you look at it, I'm not even going to go through it again because people get bored of me going through it. I just think there is something there, to work. There's certainly something there to work with. They've felt that, 20 years ago, and they've worked with it, and it is good for what it is at the moment. However, I think you need to look at the bigger picture there.
Yeah. Well, that's certainly going to start a conversation with the viewers of the podcast. That about wraps up all our talking points for this week. So I'm going to have a look at what fixtures are coming up later this week. So round 20 continues in the Super League. Salford host Hull KR on Thursday night at 8 p.m. before 2 games on Friday night, where it will be in August on Friday. It doesn't feel like that. The season's just flown by. We're in round 20 already, and geez, where does the time go? But for a Friday night, we'll see Lee versus Warrington and Saints versus Cass. Down under in the NRL, Parramatta host Melbourne on Thursday morning. That's morning in the UK. Friday morning sees New Zealand Warriors host the Dolphins, followed by Brisbane versus South Sydney Rabbitohs. Saturday has Gold Coast versus Penrith, St George Illawarra versus Canberra, and Manly Sea Eagles versus Sydney Roosters. And then finally on Sunday, West Tigers versus Canterbury Bulldogs and Cronulla Sharks versus the North Queensland Cowboys. What match are you most looking forward to this weekend, Ian? If you've got one.
Do you know what? I'm going to look forward to Saints against Castleford, because one thing I don't know how many people will realise this, but Castleford have a certain ex-Saints player in their ranks who I've been really impressed with. We had him on loan briefly, if you remember that. Our 34-28 victory at Magic Overview a few years ago. He made his debut for us in that. It's called Josh Sim.
Oh, yeah. I do remember
playing
Josh
on
Sim.
the wing for Castleford against his former employers, and he might feel like, well, do you know what? I've got a point to prove here. And do you know what? I think he's a much underrated player. I think in his senior in the Castleford team gets all the plaudits for playing on the wing there, and rightly so. But I think Josh Sim is a much better player than a lot of people give him credit for. And I think, he had that moment when he did his swan dive for his try against Warrington, and they were, but to be fair, he's still a youngish lad, and he's still, he'd be excited, he was scoring a great try. And I just think that there could be something that, I expect St Helens to win and probably win quite comfortably, but I'm eager to see how Josh Sim maybe makes the likes of Paul Wellens sit up and take notice and think, oh, maybe letting him go wasn't such a great idea.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how Castleford follow up their surprise victory over Warrington as well.
Well, yeah, that's the other thing, how much momentum have they created there. And, of course, St Helens were quite insipid in their last performance against Lee, weren't they? They were not really at the, they were okay, but they were not really at the races as such, were they?
No.
And, and I just think, again, what we're looking at is it depends which version of St Helens turns up as well as which version of Castleford turns up, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
But we'll see.
We'll see.
I think it could be interesting. Rovers, I expect to win quite comfortably, obviously, as I've put in my predictions. But
Yeah.
I just think Saints and Cass. I'm quite looking forward to that. I think.
Yeah. I'm obviously looking forward to seeing my team again after a week of not having a game. Again, it's hard to. I don't want to overlook Salford, but it'd be difficult to see anything but a fairly comfortable victory for Rovers, restoring the 4 point lead at the top and hopefully making the most of building up a bigger points difference than what we already have as well
Yeah,
would be useful. I think,
because we've got Salford. We're at home against Salford the following week.
yeah. So
So yeah, I suppose I should watch that to see what to expect. But I think I already know what to expect anyway.
yeah. Well,
It's not been that long since we played Salford at Salford anyway. So
I was very impressed by Declan Murphy, who they've just confirmed they've signed to the end of the season. I think
yeah,
he's one to watch for the future.
definitely. Yeah,
Um,
he's definitely one to watch.
but that brings our second episode to a close then. So thank you very much for another insightful conversation, Ian.
Thank you
Um,
very much indeed. Much appreciated.
we shall close. I'll just close by plugging the website, gerrimonside.co.uk. I'll be publishing my Ashes squad on there, along with an explainer as why I've picked the players that I've picked. That'll be being published tomorrow, as this is put out on YouTube on the Monday night. That'll be out on the Tuesday. And
Yeah.
I thought I'll just give our viewers a little showing of Jackson to say
Where
goodbye.
is it?
Jackson, come on, bud.
Oh, we've got movement from Jackson. Hello,
There he is.
Jackson. Hey. Why hasn't he got his Rovers shirt on?
Because he didn't ask for it on today, so we're.
No.
I forgot
Well,
to
he
put
has
it
to
on
ask
before we
for it.
started record.
He
I
has to
forgot
ask
to
to
put it on.
have it on, does he?
Yeah, is I forgot to put it on before we started recording, but
Never mind.
so it's
Never
it's a
mind.
goodbye from me and a goodbye from Jackson, and we shall see
Thank you
you
very
all
much.
next week. Thanks for watching Gerrim Onside. Keep tuning for next week.
And don't forget to like and subscribe.
Yes, that too. And you can find Ian at Holderness Gazette, can't you, Ian, as well?
Indeed, you can. Yes.
So thank you very much for watching. Like and subscribe. Read us at GerrimOnside.co.uk.
Cheers.